This past week, I was asked a question. And the question was, if you had to describe your ministry for the last 35 years, give it a motto. It was a question that was, it was a good question, and it caught me off guard. But what I responded in thinking about it during the rest of the week was probably pretty honest. I said that my motto would be, attempt to be fearless. And I look back on my ministry over 35 years, and I think that I have made that attempt to the best of my ability. When I look back over the 35 years, I'm reminded of the man who taught preaching at Princeton Theological Seminary. He was Wyatt T. Walker, who was a pastor from Harlem, who had worked famously with another man by the name of Edler Hawkins on the I Have a Dream speech for Martin Luther King. In his final class to all of us, he said something to us about our preaching. He said, you have to be fearless. It is easy to be beloved. It is even easier to be liked. And there's no problem whatsoever for being popular. That's never left me. And one of the things that has also never left me is that those sermons which I have delivered over 35 years that have been most controversial and probably have aroused the most attention and critique are scriptural. And what I wish to share with all of you today is a brief passage of Scripture from Matthew chapter 5. And I'm going to begin my sermon by reading it to you, but I'm going to ask you with my whole heart to hear it. Not just listen to it, hear it. And ask yourself why this message is indeed so scandalous, so offensive, and so reflective of the gospel of Jesus Christ. This is my last sermon on the Gospels, not my last sermon from the Gospels, but my last sermon on addressing the themes, the essential perspective and attitude and truths of the Gospels, trying to gain an understanding of the editorial perspectives of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and even Paul. But today, looking to the scandal of Scripture, because we forget so many times in our popularized Christianity that Jesus was crucified for a reason. And it was not for being popular. His followers were few. His message immensely controversial. And the early church a complete scandal from beginning to end. If you hear this message today, you will hear my attitude, my perspective on what has been an attempt to be fearless from the pulpit and to lead you as a church family and any church family with whom I have been associated to a deeper and fuller understanding of the controversial nature of what we claim to believe in. But more than anything else, I've also worked hard to remind you that the message that is being taught in today's world, where we are teaching an American Jesus, where Jesus is thought of as white and Southern and American and well-to-do and Republican, that it is time for all of us to really ask ourselves clearly, is this truly the Christ of the world? Is this truly the Christ of tender mercies? Is this the Christ that will help us to come together as a world and to build a saner, safer, and simpler world? Or is this simply the Old Testament Christ? A new Pharisaic Christ built to produce one great nation and one great people, and only the good people, the right people, will then go to heaven. Remember that that was the message to which Jesus came and totally contradicted. One nation, one people, one truth, one heaven. And Jesus Christ came and said, no. He lifted up shepherds, he lifted up Samaritans, he lifted up lepers and prostitutes, and he said, no. We don't like that message. We've never liked that message. Hear that message from the Gospel of Matthew. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give them your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go the 2nd mile also. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. I defy you, every single one of us here today, to not understand why this message is so controversial and scandalous. Does this have anything to do with what we're taught on a daily basis? We are still taught an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. We're still taught to not be a fool and go the extra mile. We are still taught to not give to the beggar because we're going to make the beggar weaker. Where all along, Jesus Christ was basically saying, the real issue is, it's going to make you, the giver, stronger. It is such a difficult message because we live in a world where everything is about who gets the biggest piece of the pie, who gets the fairest share. This is a difficult time we live in, folks, a very, very difficult time. But to try to introduce Christ into the equation and try to bring Christ's gospel into the equation, we need to be doing that on a spiritual basis, on a social basis, a political basis, and the basis of our own church. You have heard that it's been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Folks, that was the essence of the Jewish faith. And he's saying no. He goes on and he says, you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. That message was a scandal, is a scandal, and will always be a scandal. My Lord, folks, we can't even do it in the church, love our enemies. We can't even disagree in the church. We can't even have a discussion or a dialogue or a debate. And I don't just mean our church, the church as a whole. If there's a disagreement in our church, people leave. If there's a disagreement in the Episcopal Church, they're going to form a whole new church. Why? Because loving is not easy. And the love that Christ calls us to is not easy. I look at people over the course of my 35 years of ministry, and I can say to you, I know that there are people who have loved me and cherished me, and I know that there are people who can't stand me. I've experienced both. I know what both feels like. But as a minister, I also know that I am compelled and challenged to at all times do my very best to love and respect every single person and to seek to lift the best out of them and to not turn anyone away. Is that easy? No. Do I want to do that all the time? No. There are many times as a minister that I've wanted to scream and shout, I wish that I could tell you what I think of you, to some of the people who so readily and easily have so much to say about me. But I know I share that with all kinds of ministers. I think every minister alive, including Jesus Christ. Oh, would I love to tell you what I think. But what's the purpose? And so I ask you today, in your families, who do you have a hard time loving in your families? Your friendships. How many friendships have you lost in the last 10 years over silly, petty arguments? Which people in our culture do you have a tough time with because you don't agree with them?